warning, major spoilers for Gintama the Final. If you don't want to get spoiled, and believe me you don't, I'd advise you to click off this video. But with that being said, if you're ready to continue, then by all means, enjoy the show. All great things must come to an end, and this statement is especially true for none other than Gintama, of which I've already made my thoughts quite clear about. So there's no point me rambling on about how much I love it, because I hate long intros, so instead, let's just get straight into it. Gintama the Final, a perfect ending to a perfect anime. Let's begin. So I'm going to try and talk about this movie in roughly chronological order, which means starting with what Gintama does best, a good old parody and a Dragon Ball one at that. Obviously, being a movie, they had to do some kind of recap to get you back up to speed, and this is such a great way to make something usually pretty boring into something hilarious. A massive spoof on Dragon Ball drawn in the style of Akira Toriyama, and with references galore. There is so much to unpick in these first 2 minutes. It's insane. Gintoki as Goku, Takasugi as Vegeta, Katsura as Yamcha, the Shinsengumi posing as the Ginyu Force, the Terminal as Kami's Tower. As someone introduced into the world of anime through Dragon Ball, this put the biggest smile on my face. It's just such a fun introduction, and I'm also really surprised they somehow got the rights for the original DBZ opening. I'm sure that took a chunk out of their budget, but anyway, I could talk about this intro all day, so let's move on. So first of all, I was really surprised at just how quick it takes to get into the action. Only 10 minutes in, and just like that, we have our first fight with Gintoki, Takasugi and Katsura fighting the Imansos in the terminal. The first half an hour is incredibly fast paced. It feels like one continuous fight scene, whether it's Shoujo's students or the rest of the cast. The first third of the movie is just non-stop action with great animation to boot. And speaking of which, let's get into the animation, why don't we? Because it's great. In my opinion, not the best we've ever seen in Gintama. That honour would still lie with the first Benizakura movie, but the animation is still incredible, especially during the main fight scene of the movie, which of course I'll get onto a bit later. But where I think this movie really shines is the individual pieces of art themselves. The art is by far the best we've ever seen in Gintama, which is to be expected, having the budget of a feature-length movie and the couple years of difference between the Silver Soul arc and this movie. It is amazing looking at the sheer difference in art from Gintoki's first appearance in 2006 and here in 2021. The artistic evolution between the two is nothing but commendable. And speaking of commendable, the soundtrack, which they really did pull out all the stops for. 3 tracks from Does, the band behind openings 5 and 17, and a track from Spire, the band behind opening 21, and of course, everyone's favourite, opening 13. They work as well as you'd expect, adding an element of intensity to the already amazing action scenes, although I do think some of these scenes were a little bit on the short side, resulting in these tracks being a little bit underused. But anyway, I'm just nitpicking for the sake of nitpicking, because I'm from the UK and all we do here is complain. So with that being said, let's get on to a scene that I absolutely can't complain about. The big scene of the movie, a scene built up for over 300 episodes. This movie's pièce de résistance, Gintoki vs Takasugi controlled by Utsudo, or vice versa, Utsudo controlled by Takasugi. To put it simply, this is my favourite fight in Gintama, and dare I say my favourite fight in anime, due to just how distinct it is and the emotional value it carries with it. When you think of a Gintama fight scene, what comes to mind? Loud, dramatic, over the top, non-stop action, hype music pumping adrenaline into your veins? Well, imagine the complete opposite. This fight scene is like nothing we've seen in Gintama thus far. When it comes down to action scenes, Gintama has always been pretty traditional shonen goodness, loud, eccentric, and ultimately pretty simple. But Gintoki vs Utsudo does not even come close to matching that description. Instead, it's much more abstract and metaphorical than anything else we've seen in the series. The main thing that did it for me was the fact that the entire fight was almost completely silent. No music whatsoever, which in this instance feels much more impactful than the presence of said music. I think I'd be right in saying this is the only part of Gintama that can have multiple interpretations of the same scene, so how about I give you a play-by-play of the scene and talk to you about what I think of it step by step. We start with Gintoki entering the scene and spotting Takasugi. A wave of dust passes by, and in actuality it's revealed to be Utsudo, at least it is to the viewer. But the character Gintoki is fighting is still Takasugi, manifested as Utaro thanks to being the last remaining bearer of Utaro's immortal blood. It's not made clear if he was made to look like Utaro as a visual representation for the audience, or he actually did have the appearance of Utaro, but I'd be inclined to believe the first option. Gintoki sees this character as Takasugi, not Utaro, due to the clear hesitation and sadness in Gintoki's face at the end of the fight, and furthermore, the reflection in his sword presents the character as Utaro before flipping over to reveal Takasugi, just as Gintoki grips said sword, implying that from his perspective, the face in front of him is indeed Takasugi. Whereas we, the audience, see it from Utaro's perspective, where he sees Takasugi as himself. Of course, it's all open to interpretation, but that's my opinion anyway. But let's continue. Utaro takes the first strike at Gintoki, presented as a one-sided massacre as Utaro most likely kills Gintoki straight away, wasting no time whatsoever and impaling him onto this stone column. But as Utaro attempts to land the final blow, Gintoki suddenly gets up and points his sword back at him, as it's revealed that all that has happened so far was an illusion inside the mind of Utaro. They then continue to fight until a face-to-face dialogue scene between the two, where once again we're back at square one. So far nothing has actually happened in reality, it's all been within Utaro's head. Emphasizing the point I made earlier of how we see this character presented as not Takasugi, but Utaro, only because we're watching this scene from his perspective at this point, not Gintoki's. We then see behind Utaro a visual representation of Takasugi's willpower fighting back against Utaro's blood within his body, as he turns around and no one's there. And it's at this point it's revealed he's actually been lying face down on the floor this entire time, and it's only from now on interactions between Gintoki and Utaro actually take place in reality. It's then revealed that Utaro now has a large open wound in his chest, as we now transition into a flashback from presumably not long ago, as we now see the opposite. Unlike before, it's now Utaro visually represented as Takasugi, as he now attacks the recently reborn Yoshida Shoryu before being stopped by the willpower of Takasugi and Oboro. And it's then learned that the chest wound on Utaro came as a result of Takasugi stabbing himself in the chest, knowing that's the only way to weaken Utaro, as the last remnants of Utaro's blood remain inside him. We then transition back to the present as the now injured Utaro attempts to attack Gintoki, but is simply unable to hit him due to, again, Takasugi's willpower not allowing him to do so. And this is directly shown as a depiction of Takasugi is blocking the last strike, despite of course not being there to do so, only present within Utaro's mind. We also get to see how Gintoki has the utmost trust in Takasugi, remaining completely calm as he knows full well that Takasugi will not allow him to get hurt, emphasizing the camaraderie between the two at this point. As we then get into the first actual fight scene between the two, which has amazing animation as we see their movements laid on top of major conflicts between the two in the past. Gintoki vs Utaro during the Silver Soul arc, Gintoki vs Takasugi during the Shogun Assassination arc, and Gintoki vs Utaro during the Farewell Shinsengumi arc. It's also interesting how we get a close-up of Utaro's sword containing a symbol, which although has unfortunate connotations here in the West, is known as a manji in Japan, a symbol of good luck and prosperity. This is followed by a quick yet incredibly powerful shot of Gintoki and Takasugi's first encounter, in the anime over 350 episodes ago, back in episode 17. And I think at this point I should emphasise once again that this scene is almost completely silent. No music, no dialogue, and only quiet, muffled sound effects. But anyway, this idea of their movements being laid on top of scenes from the past continues throughout the rest of this fight, such as Gintoki's beheading of Shoryu and Gintoki practicing kenjutsu at Shokusonjuku. We then see Gintoki falling back until the sight of Takasugi's happiness gives him the strength to get back into action as he disarms Utaro, who is wielding Takasugi's sword. And it's at this point we see the aforementioned scene of the sword reflecting Utaro before flipping over and presenting the character as Takasugi, as Gintoki grips the sword to deal the final blow. We then see Gintoki's clearly pained expression, making for, in my opinion, the most powerful shot of the movie as he stares down his comrade, knowing full well he has to cut him down. And that he does, charging forward, dealing the final blow and ending the fight, resulting in the deaths of both Utaro and Takasugi at the hands of Gintoki. So that was quite a handful, but I think I've explained it as well as I can, and just why this scene was so incredible, as I'd recommend you to rewatch this a couple more times, because it's simply just so good. But anyway, with that being said, I don't want this whole video to be on one single scene, so how about I move on to the second half of the movie, because this climax is only about halfway into the movie, there's still quite a lot to go. starting with the emotional scene between Gintoki and the almost dead Takasugi. At least it would have been emotional if I hadn't been spoiled on his death. But anyway, this is also done exceptionally well, especially in the scene in which Gintoki reveals he would have loved to just have a drink with Takasugi. It's incredibly emotional and serves as a fantastic ending to a fantastic character. It's always annoying in shonen anime when we have a new arc, new villain, that villain is defeated, never seen again. New arc, brand new villain, that villain is defeated, never seen again. So it is commendable at how Takasugi, a character introduced in episode 17, built up for a tad over 15 years, has remained an important character from start to finish, and probably has the best character development in Gintama. Oh, and also, random side point, look at the absolute unit that is Gintoki in this scene. I don't know why he's so big, but I just found it funny. But anyway now, speaking of fantastic endings to fantastic characters, the movie's turning point involves Yoshida Shoujo using the last of the Altana within his body to contain the Altana within the terminal and stop the planet from, well, exploding. It acts as a great final scene for not just the movie, but Gintama in general, with Gintoki finally meeting Shoujo again, this time alongside the rest of YAAW. There's nothing to really analyse here, it's just a nice touching scene, as Shoujo sacrifices himself in order to maintain peace, and that's that. That's the end of the serious part of the movie. What I noticed is that this movie's pacing is incredibly fast. Everything I've said so far only took place in roughly an hour, but then we get into the last half an hour of the movie where the pacing does drop a bit. And by a bit, I mean it falls off a cliff. The last half an hour of the movie consists of our main characters explaining to the reawakened Tama as to what has happened since she was originally killed in the Silver Soul arc. And I'm not gonna lie in saying that although this final half an hour is pretty funny, my god, it does drag on a bit, and it's pretty clear it was here just to extend the movie's runtime a bit more. But despite this final half an hour dragging on so much, Gintama has every right to do so in my opinion, when you put into context that this is undeniably the final scene of an anime that's been going on for 15 years. As someone who's only been watching this show for just over half a year, I can't even begin to imagine what it would be like for someone who started it in 2006, and when you take a look at it like that, honestly, they have every right to drag the ending out for 5 hours for all I care. So let's get into this final half an hour, why don't we, because there is quite a lot of fun to be had. First of all, it's nice seeing post-time skip Yorozuya for the first time since Gintoki returned, and a lot of these scenes are put there just to please the audience or confirm any loose ends and unanswered questions, like the Shinsengumi once again becoming the main police force of Edo. I also love the twist they pulled, with Tamako explaining to Tama that this is suddenly now Tokyo as a result of huge technological developments after the war, which I completely fell for, as we learn that Hasegawa somehow just messed everything up, as we get to the revelation that after all, nothing has changed and life continues as normal, for the first time since before the Shogun assassination arc. There were a couple other great scenes as well, such as Sakamoto's letter to Gintoki. I don't know why, but him saying, "they dead lololol," made me burst out laughing so much, but anyway, let's just move on to something a little more interesting. And that is Makoto finding at one of the gates what appears to be a reborn baby Takasugi, the same way in which Gintoki found the baby Shoujo. It's left up in the air as to whether or not this really is a sort of reincarnation of Takasugi, but personally, I'd rather it not be the case. Not due to any logical reason, more due to it kind of undermining his sacrifice if he was just reborn. I know Gintama is a series in which few major characters permanently die, but Takasugi should stay dead, and not reborn in one way or another, as it would completely devalue the entire fight scene. But anyway, the manga's over now, so my headcanon is that this kid is not Takasugi. But with that being said, that's pretty much it for the movie, as we get into a fantastic ED from Spy Air as mentioned earlier, and an end credits Ginpachi Sensei scene, a gag we haven't seen in quite a while. And as expected, it is great classic fourth wall breaking Gintama. We have Hideaki Sorachi himself explaining that the last couple of chapters of the manga were delayed because he was too busy playing Sekiro, and him admitting that the only reason Gintoki has white hair is because it's easier to draw in the manga. Like what? Only Gintama could get away with stuff like this. But anyway, that is about it for this movie. As you can tell by this video's segments, the main fight is by far the biggest talking point of the movie, so I had to sort of rush through the opening half an hour or so this wouldn't be a 5-hour long video. But ultimately, the action scenes were incredible, the soundtrack was incredible, the art was incredible, the animation, although not the best we've ever seen, was definitely still great. The comedy was great when it was there, but of course, being a pretty serious arc, there wasn't too many times where comedy could be suitably integrated without it feeling too unnatural or forced. And overall, it is the easiest 10 out of 10 I've ever given in my life. It's even just a 10 out of 10 from the fight scene alone, which I can safely say now is my new favourite fight scene in anime. So Gintama the Final, a perfect ending to a perfect anime. And with that being said, I'll be back in the next video. See ya!